There is a silence inside you that has been crying for decades, but no one taught you how to hear it. You've covered it in laughter, drowned it in ambition, and buried it beneath the persona you were forced to wear. Yet it never stopped whispering. It echoed through your failed relationships. It leaked into your anger, your shame, your exhaustion. That silence is the child you left behind. Not the child you remember in pictures, but the one who once felt everything too deeply before you learned to numb it. Before you were taught that your tears were too loud, your needs were too much, your joy too wild. That child, the one you silenced so the world would accept you, is still inside. And no matter how old your body becomes, you will never outrun the pain of that betrayal. Carl Jung understood that our past does not vanish. It transforms into shadow. The inner child, unmet and unloved, becomes the silent architect of your fears. The sabotaging voice, the unconscious hunger, the loneliness you can't explain. Healing is not a process of forgetting, it is a sacred remembering. You cannot heal what you still deny. You cannot free yourself while dragging chains you pretend aren't there. And the most dangerous chains are not physical. They're the beliefs you inherited when you were too young to resist. The ones that said love must be earned, that your worth depends on performance, that silence keeps you safe. These ideas weren't born from truth, but from survival. A child doesn't reason. A child absorbs, and whatever the world made you believe back then, it became law in the unconscious. You still live by those laws. You still shrink when someone raises their voice. You still apologize for taking up space. You still feel guilty when you rest. That's not adulthood. That's an inner child waiting to be heard, waiting to be held. The journey of healing begins with truth, and truth is rarely comfortable. It demands that you revisit the wounds you buried, that you stop pretending they made you stronger. They didn't. They made you harder, colder, distant from yourself. You don't need to forgive and forget. You need to feel and remember. You need to go back, not to blame, but to reclaim what was lost. Because you left something sacred in that past. You left your softness, your playfulness, your instinct, your awe. You left the part of you that once believed the world was beautiful, before the world taught you to protect yourself from it. Jung said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, but you cannot become whole by amputating the parts of yourself that hurt. You don't heal the inner child by talking over her. You heal her by listening, not with your ears, but with your presence. The child inside doesn't need advice. She needs to be seen, to be believed, to be held in the safety she never had. And that safety begins with you, with creating a space where your emotions are not a threat, where your needs are not shamed, where your voice is not dismissed. The moment you say to yourself, "I believe you," something begins to shift. That little one who cried in secret, she starts to come home, and with her comes your light, the light you thought you had lost. But it won't come all at once, because trust once broken must be rebuilt. The inner child doesn't rush. She waits. She watches. She tests you to see if you'll abandon her again. And often you do. You overwork. You people please. You fall into patterns that suffocate your joy. That's part of the process. You're not failing. You're learning to unlearn. Learning to stop betraying yourself for approval. Learning to say no when you used to say yes through clenched teeth. Healing is not linear. It's circular. You revisit the same places again and again, but each time with more compassion, more awareness, more strength. And as you do, the shadow softens. The defenses loosen. The world that once felt hostile begins to look different, not because it changed, but because you did. You see, the wound was never your fault, but the healing is your responsibility. No one can do it for you. No one can give you back the years you lost to fear and silence. But you can give yourself this moment. And this moment is everything. Because right here, right now, you can choose to stop running. You can choose to sit beside the brokenness without shame. You can choose to say, "You're not too much. You never were." That's the voice the inner child has been waiting for. Not a parent, not a savior, but you. You may think healing means becoming someone new, but the truth is far more haunting. Healing is unbecoming who you were told to be, so you can finally return to who you were before the world got to you. It's not about becoming better. It's about becoming real. The masks must fall. The roles must crumble. The perfection you cling to must be seen for what it is, a shield forged in fear. Jung called it the persona, the social mask you wear to survive. But beneath it is the raw, trembling, innocent truth of who you really are. The child you locked away to be acceptable. The voice you quieted to be loved. The dreams you buried to be safe. That's where the inner child lives, in the quiet spaces you stopped visiting. The parts of yourself you forgot how to touch. But they didn't forget you. They've been waiting, patiently, silently, hoping you'd return, not with judgment, but with love. And when you do, the landscape of your inner world begins to shift. No longer a battlefield of suppressed memories and rigid identities, but a sanctuary of gentle reconciliation. You begin to realize that the pain was not punishment, it was a cry, a call from the soul, a signal that something sacred had been denied. And the child you once were, she doesn't need to be fixed, she needs to be included. Integration is the path forward. Not cutting off the painful parts, but holding them close until they soften. Jung said the shadow is not evil in itself, it only becomes dangerous when ignored. The same is true for the inner child. When she is unheard, she sabotages. When she is unseen, she seeks attention in chaotic ways. But when you finally sit with her, when you look into your own eyes with kindness rather than critique, she becomes your guide. She leads you home. You will start to remember things you thought you'd forgotten. Not facts, but feelings. The sting of being dismissed. The ache of not being chosen. The unbearable silence after you cried and no one came. These are not just memories, they are imprints. Emotional fossils that still shape how you speak, how you love, how you hide. And until you face them, they will continue to dictate your present. That's the tragedy of unhealed wounds. They don't stay in the past. They whisper in your decisions. They echo in your tone. They steer your life from the shadows. Healing is the act of turning on the light, not to erase the past, but to understand it. And in that understanding, something beautiful happens. You begin to forgive yourself for the times you abandoned your truth just to be accepted. For the years you spent chasing validation that never satisfied. For the way you learned to betray yourself without even noticing. This is not easy work. It is soul work. And soul work is not always beautiful. It is messy, terrifying, and sacred. It will ask everything of you. It will break the structures you've built on fear. It will strip away your certainties and expose your heart. But in that nakedness, you will find something you lost long ago, your innocence. Not in the naive sense, but in the wholly grounded sense. The part of you that still believes in wonder. The part that still feels the rain and wants to dance. The part that sees pain and wants to reach out, not recoil. That's the child. That's the self. That's what was never truly gone, only forgotten. And so you begin to change. Not because someone told you to, but because the truth inside you can no longer be silenced. You start to rest without guilt. You start to say no without fear. You begin to laugh from the belly again, not because life is perfect, but because you are finally present. You begin to see yourself not as broken, but as becoming. Becoming whole, becoming real, becoming who you were always meant to be. This is what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming yourself. Not the self they programmed you to be, but the deeper self that always was. And the inner child is not a relic of the past. She is the door to that self. She holds the key. She always did. But you must be brave enough to knock. Brave enough to enter. Brave enough to sit on the floor of your own history and say, I'm here now. I won't leave again. Because that's what healing truly is. Not a destination, not a cure, but a relationship, a sacred bond with your own soul. And every time you choose truth over denial, softness over shame, presence over escape, You rebuild that bond. You begin to trust yourself again. And in that trust, the child begins to play again. She begins to sing. She begins to live. And so do you. But don't expect this awakening to be gentle. Reuniting with your inner child is not all sunlight and laughter. It is raw. It is wild. It is the storm before the bloom. Because the moment you let her speak, really speak, she won't begin with gratitude. She will begin with grief. She will weep for the years she was silenced. She will rage for the touch. She never felt the truth. She never got to tell the love she never knew how to ask for. And you must let her. You must let her scream without flinching. Let her cry without silencing her. Let her rage without shame. Because that's what she needed back then. Not a solution, but a witness. Not discipline, but dignity. Not silence, but safety. If you turn away from her pain again, you only deepen the wound. But if you stay, if you choose to sit in the fire without running, something shifts. The fire becomes warmth. The scream becomes a song. And the child, once abandoned, becomes the healer. Jung warned that the greatest danger is the unlived life. The one we forfeit when we sacrifice ourselves for approval. The one we bury beneath our roles, our duties, our numbing habits. But your inner child remembers that life. She remembers the dreams you dismissed as silly. She remembers the voice you lowered to be likable. She remembers the parts of you that once danced without music, trusted without proof, and loved without armor. And she wants you to return, not to become a child again, but to become whole again. Wholeness is not perfection. It is integration. It is the ability to sit with your contradictions and still love yourself. To hold both light and shadow without shame. To carry your wounds not as curses, but as initiation. That is the essence of healing, not becoming someone else, but finally being allowed to be all of yourself. And when you allow that inner child to rise again slowly, hesitantly, but fully, you will start to feel something strange freedom. Not the fleeting kind that comes from escape, but the rooted kind that comes from presence. A freedom that does not require the world to change, only your relationship with yourself. You begin to walk differently, speak differently, choose differently, because now you're not trying to prove your worth, you're living from it. You're not grasping for love, you're offering it to yourself, and the people around you will feel it. Some will be drawn to it, others will resist it, because your healing will unsettle those who benefit from your wounding. But that is not your burden. You were not born to keep others comfortable. You were born to be whole. This is what it means to set yourself free. Not to erase the past, but to make peace with it. Not to forget the child, but to let her lead. Not to escape pain, but to find meaning in it. The tears you cried in silence were not wasted. They watered the roots of your awakening. And now you stand at the edge of something sacred, the return, not to the illusion of childhood, but to the truth beneath it. A truth that was never destroyed, only hidden. The truth that you are enough, that you always were, that you never had to earn love, only to receive it, and the first person you must receive it from is you. So speak to that little one again. Close your eyes and feel her presence. Let her sit beside you, not as a memory, but as a part of your being. Tell her she's safe now. Tell her she doesn't have to hide. Tell her you're listening, and then be quiet. Let her answer. She may not speak in words, but you will feel her. In the breath you finally exhale, in the tension that begins to dissolve, in the tears that rise without warning. That is her language. That is her return, and when she knows she's welcome, she will flood you with the parts of you that never died, only waited. And when the flood comes, let it cleanse you. Let it strip away the armor you've worn for decades. Let it wash the dust from the corners of your soul you were too afraid to visit. Let it carry away the lies you believed to survive. Because the child within you does not want your perfection, she wants your presence. She does not need you to be healed to come close. She needs you to be honest, to be human, to be here. And once you are, once you choose to stay no matter how messy it feels, the healing begins in earnest, not as a miracle, but as a return to what was always waiting underneath the truth of your heart, undistorted by fear. Jung taught that the unconscious holds all we've disowned, and until we make it conscious, it will rule our lives, and we will call it fate. The inner child lives deep within that unconscious. She holds the forgotten language of your soul. And when you reclaim her, you reclaim the lost parts of your identity. You reclaim spontaneity, curiosity, courage. You start to say yes to things that once terrified you and no to things that used to control you. You no longer seek to impress, but to express. You begin to choose relationships that nourish your inner world, not just distract from your loneliness. Because now, you're no longer seeking someone to complete you. You're learning to complete yourself. But understand this, the world won't always celebrate your healing. Many will resist it. Some will mock it. Others will try to drag you back into your former roles, because your liberation is threatening. It reminds them of the chains they still wear. But you must not betray yourself again just to be liked. You've done that too long. You've dimmed your light too often. You've called it humility, but it was fear. And now the inner child in you is begging not to be hidden anymore. She wants to be seen not just in private, but in the way you walk into a room, in the way you speak your boundaries, in the way you stop apologizing for who you are. And yes, there will be grief. Grief for what could have been if someone had loved you as you needed. If someone had protected you, seen you, chosen you. But the grief is holy. It is not weakness. It is the price of waking up. You cannot reclaim your joy without also reclaiming your sorrow. They are twins, they rise together. And as you grieve, the child within begins to trust again. Because now you are mourning with her, not pushing her aside. Now you say, "I'm so sorry no one was there," and you mean it. You hold her and say, "I'm here now," and you keep showing up. And slowly the walls begin to fall. The numbness begins to thaw. The light begins to pour in. You may think it's too late, that too much has been lost, but the child doesn't know time. She only knows presence. And right now, in this moment, she is reaching for you, not in punishment, but in invitation. Will you meet her? Will you sit in the dark and hold her trembling hand? Will you say, "You don't have to pretend anymore. I see you. I want you. I need you." Because once you do, you will feel it not just emotionally, but physically. The breath you've been holding for years will release. The knot in your chest will begin to loosen, because this is what you've always needed. Not a new self, but a returned self. A reunion, a remembering, a coming home to the child who never stopped waiting for you. And when you finally hold her in your heart, not as an idea, but as a living truth, you will understand something profound, that the child you thought was broken was never broken. She was simply unheard, unseen, unmet, and now that you see her, everything changes. You stop living from your wounds. You start living from your truth. You stop trying to be loved. You start becoming love. Because that is what healing does. It turns survival into sacredness. It turns pain into presence. It turns the wounded child into the wise guide. This is the freedom Jung spoke of. Not freedom from suffering, but freedom through it. And now you are walking that path, not alone, never alone, but with the one who needed you most, the child, your truest self, the one who is finally blessedly free.
There comes a moment in your life when you realize you're not just looking at people, you're seeing through them. It's not a trick of the mind, not paranoia, not fantasy. It's a kind of silent X-ray vision for the soul. A friend speaks, and you hear the tremor they've hidden inside their voice. A stranger smiles, and you notice the tiny fracture in it. You walk into a room and feel the emotional temperature drop before anyone else notices the frost. At first, you think everyone perceives the world like this, that surely others can feel the same undercurrents. But slowly, with each startled glance, each defensive laugh, each accusation that you're imagining things, you discover the truth. You see more than you should. And the more you see, the more alone you become. Carl Jung once wrote, "The curse of consciousness is that it cannot be shared with those who do not possess it." He wasn't being dramatic. He was speaking from a lifetime of watching certain people, the rarest psychological types, burn under the weight of their own vision. People whose perception pierces the persona, that social mask we all wear to function. They don't just glimpse the cracks in the mask, they see the whole fragile structure beneath it. You may have noticed this in yourself, the way you instinctively register the smallest shifts in another person's face. The way you can tell when someone's laughter is hiding despair. The way you can feel a conflict in the air before words are even spoken. Jung called this differentiated perception an awareness so refined it captures the unconscious contents others leak without meaning to. It is a dangerous gift. Not dangerous because it harms you physically, but because it changes how you belong in the world. When you see beneath the collective agreements the unspoken rules that say, "We won't talk about that," "We'll pretend this is fine," you disrupt the invisible glue that keeps groups together. You may think you're offering truth, clarity, even help, but to those still living inside those agreements, you become the threat. And so you find yourself exiled in subtle ways. People pull back. They smile less easily. They don't want you too close because proximity to you feels like being under a microscope. They might even accuse you of being judgmental, negative, or strange when all you did was notice what they were already feeling, but refusing to name. Jung saw this again and again in his clinical practice. One patient in particular haunted him, a quiet, deeply intuitive woman who came to him in 1913 during his own time of psychic turmoil after parting ways with Freud. She could walk into any space and immediately sense who was lying, who was wounded, who was burning with resentment beneath polite silence. She had no choice in the matter. It wasn't analysis. It was instant knowing. But the gift did not make her powerful. It made her unbearably exposed. She couldn't maintain friendships because people felt too naked around her. She couldn't hold jobs because her presence disrupted the invisible illusions that made workplaces bearable. She wasn't broken. She wasn't unstable. But she was drowning in a flood of information no one else could even see. Jung realized something unsettling. She wasn't suffering from a mental illness. She was suffering from too much reality. When the unconscious becomes too conscious, when the boundary between what's hidden and what's visible dissolves, you find yourself inhabiting a different psychological climate from everyone else. And here is the part that cuts the deepest. People rarely thank you for seeing them clearly. Instead, they project their shadow onto you. The shadow, in Jung's words, is the part of the self we deny, repress, and hide. When you reflect it back even gently, you become the mirror they cannot bear to look into. They can either integrate what they see, or they can shatter the mirror, and most will choose the latter. If you've been on the receiving end of this, you know how it feels. You point out a truth and someone snaps at you for making things up. You express concern, and you're accused of creating drama. The wound isn't just in being misunderstood, it's in feeling like reality itself is being denied, leaving you stranded between what is and what others insist must be. Over time, this can lead to an ache that is deeper than loneliness. Jung called it psychological isolation. It's not merely the absence of company, it's the sense that you live in a different dimension of awareness. The conversations others have skim across the surface while you stand on the shore of something far deeper, unable to pull anyone in without risking their wrath. If you're not careful, the gift begins to consume you. You start absorbing emotions, tensions, and unspoken stories until you no longer know which feelings are your own. Jung called this participation mystique, a state where your psychological boundaries dissolve and you merge with the collective unconscious around you. You stop being you and become a vessel for everyone else's pain, longing, and denial. And yet, and here lies the paradox, Jung did not see this capacity as a curse to be eradicated. He saw it as a high form of consciousness attempting to evolve ahead of the collective. But evolution without integration destroys the organism. To survive, you cannot simply have this perception, you must transform your relationship to it. That begins not with retreat, not with denial, but with a fierce act of inner recognition. The first step is to know when you are feeling something that isn't yours, to pause in the storm of impressions and ask, what in this belongs to me? What in this belongs to the other? Without this, you will live as a sponge for the unconscious world, mistaking its waters for your own bloodstream. Jung taught his most sensitive patients to spend deliberate time in solitude, not as an escape, but as a purification. To sit in silence until the borrowed voices quiet down, until your own voice, quiet or slower, but unmistakably yours, emerges from beneath the noise. It is here, in this inner clearing, that you begin to sense the outline of your own self. Not the persona you've worn to protect others from your vision, not the fragments of others you've absorbed, but the deep, unshakable core that belongs only to you. This is where individuation begins, not as a lofty ideal, but as a necessary act of survival. Because only when you stand rooted in the knowledge of who you are can you approach others without drowning in their unspoken truths. Only then can you hold their shadow in your field of vision without becoming possessed by it. Only then can your gift begin to serve something greater than your own exhaustion. And you will have to face the truth that no matter how much you refine this gift, some will still turn away. But now their turning away will no longer unmake you. You will stand in what you see not as an exposed nerve, but as a conscious witness. And that changes everything. You begin to realize that the danger was never in the seeing itself. It was in seeing without anchor, without the inner vessel strong enough to hold what you were given. Because perception without grounding is like opening all the windows in a storm. Everything rushes in, and soon you can't tell where the wind ends and you begin. Jung understood that for someone like you, integration is not a luxury. It is a matter of psychic survival. The world will not slow down its tides of hidden emotion for your comfort. People will not soften their projections to spare you. The unconscious will not close its doors just because you've had enough for the day. What can change is the way you meet it. Here is where the shadow enters your own story. It is tempting to believe that what disturbs you and others is theirs alone, that your gift is purely observational, untouched by your own depths. But Jung insisted otherwise. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. You may see someone's deception clearly because you have met in yourself the impulse to deceive. You may sense another's rage because there is a room in your own inner house where rage waits for you to open the door. At first, this recognition can feel like a betrayal of your gift. But it is the opposite. It is the moment your seeing becomes clean, no longer sharpened by denial or fueled by projection. When you accept that you contain all that you perceive, your vision stops being a weapon, even unintentionally. It becomes a mirror that does not distort. In Jung's language, this is shadow integration. Not the taming of darkness, but the acknowledgement that you are made of the same substance as every shadow you encounter. And from that acknowledgement comes a strange, unexpected freedom. You no longer need to exile parts of yourself, and so you no longer feel the compulsion to exile others for embodying them. This is the point where the isolation begins to shift. Because the truth is, your gift doesn't only alienate, it can also connect, but only when it's no longer laced with unconscious judgment. People can feel the difference between being scrutinized and being seen. One threatens the persona, the other invites the self to step forward. Jung believed that highly perceptive individuals, once integrated, could become bridges, not between two people, but between the conscious and the unconscious. You stop trying to drag people into the depths they are not ready for, and instead you stand at the threshold holding a light for those who choose to approach. To do this, you need what Jung called psychological containers. A container is not a wall, it is a vessel. It allows you to hold another person's unspoken truths for a time without mistaking them for your own and without needing to hurl them back as accusation. This is not suppression. It is conscious participation. You know what you're holding, and you know when to set it down. And still you will meet resistance. Some will reject what you see because it threatens the fragile architecture of their identity. Others will welcome it, but only to a point, then retreat. This is not your failure. It is the rhythm of human readiness. What changes as you integrate is the way you receive their resistance. Before, it might have felt like a personal wound, a sign that you were too much or too strange. Now you can see it for what it is, the natural defense of a psyche that isn't ready to confront its own shadow. You no longer need to push against it. You can step back without losing yourself. And as you move through the world in this way, you begin to notice something rare, the ones who can meet you where you are. They may be few, but you recognize them instantly. The way Jung described it, the individuated person can sense another individuated person, like two tuning forks vibrating in resonance. There is no shrinking away from the depth of your gaze, no flinch at the truths you carry, only a steady acknowledgement as if to say, "Yes, I live here too." With these people, the constant vigilance you've carried your whole life softens. You don't have to dim your awareness or carefully modulate your words. Your perception doesn't overwhelm them because they have met their own. They have integrated enough of their shadow to stand in the light without pain. But there are others too, those still in the process, still wrestling their inner worlds into coherence, who may not match your perception but who have the courage to stay open. These are the ones who don't need you to hide what you see. They ask questions instead of defending themselves. They might be uncomfortable, but they are willing. And perhaps most surprisingly, there are those who serve as natural containers without sharing your gift at all. They are anchored by life experience, by a kind of seasoned steadiness that allows them to hold space for you without absorbing your intensity or recoiling from it. These connections, rare as they may be, are the lifelines of your journey. They remind you that your gift integrated is not a sentence of exile. It is a particular form of belonging, one that is sparse in numbers but deep in quality. The more you embody this integration, the less you need the world to validate your perception. You can move through environments where you are misunderstood without collapsing into the old loneliness, because your identity no longer depends on being recognized. The anchor is internal, now sunk deep into the self. It's then that something subtle but powerful begins to shift in how you experience the danger of seeing. It doesn't vanish. You are still walking with a heightened awareness that can unsettle others, but it no longer corrodes you from within. You can look into the undercurrents of a room, feel its contradictions, register its unspoken tensions, and choose consciously how to meet them. And for the first time, you can walk away without carrying the whole weight of what you've seen. There is a quiet power in knowing you can see and still choose not to act. Before your vision felt like a compulsion, the truths arrived uninvited, and with them came the urge to speak, to correct, to reveal. It was as if you believed you had a duty to expose what was hidden, to drag it into the light so it could no longer fester in shadow. But Jung understood that the light is not always merciful when wielded without timing. He saw how unintegrated perception, no matter how accurate, could wound as much as it could heal. When you reveal someone's shadow before they are ready to face it, they do not thank you. They fight you, not because the truth is false, but because their inner structure cannot yet hold it without collapse. In those moments, you are no longer the bringer of clarity. You are the perceived threat. And if you are still fused with your perception, if your identity depends on being the one who sees, that rejection will feel like annihilation. You will fight back. You will insist. You will keep pushing until you become exactly what they feared. This is one of the great dangers Jung warned about, what he called psychological inflation. When the ego identifies with the archetype of the seer, the prophet, the enlightened one, it grows swollen with a false authority. It stops listening. It assumes it knows better than all others, that its perception grants it superiority. From this place, even genuine insight becomes distorted into something brittle and alienating. If you have ever felt the burn of this inflation, the satisfaction of being right, coupled with the sting of being rejected, you know it is a hollow victory. You win the truth but lose the connection. And in losing the connection, the truth itself becomes inert, unable to do the work it was meant to do. So, you begin to practice restraint not as suppression, but as a deeper form of service. You learn to gauge when a truth is ripe enough to be spoken and when it must be held in silence until the soil is ready. You learn to offer what you see in ways that do not pierce the persona like a blade, but invite the self to step forward voluntarily. This is what Jung meant by conscious participation, the ability to engage with the unconscious without becoming consumed by it or using it as a weapon. You become a translator between worlds, fluent in both the language of surface and depth. You can stand in the marketplace of everyday life exchanging simple words while at the same time holding a quiet awareness of the archetypes and shadows moving beneath. The transformation is subtle but radical. You no longer live as a raw nerve reacting to every current. You live as an anchor, able to choose when to lower your perception into the depths and when to keep it at the surface. And because you are no longer drowning, you can finally offer your vision in a way that others can receive. In Jung's view, this is where the gift begins to fulfill its evolutionary purpose. He believed that those who see beyond the collective illusions are like scouts, moving ahead of the rest of humanity, sensing the terrain before others arrive. You pick up on dangers, patterns, and possibilities that have not yet broken the surface of common awareness. And if you have integrated your gift, you can return from the edge and speak of what you've seen without overwhelming or alienating the very people who may one day need that knowledge. There is an elegance to this stage, the ability to carry the depth lightly. You can sense the grief in a friend's laughter and choose not to name it immediately because you feel the part of them that is not yet ready to look. You can stand in a room buzzing with unspoken conflict and still move with grace because you know that your presence alone, calm, steady, unthreatened, is already shifting the atmosphere. This is the moment where you begin to see that the danger of your gift was never inherent in the seeing itself. It was in the lack of relationship between the seeing and the self. Without the self as anchor, the vision becomes overwhelming, compulsive, even destructive. With the self present, the vision becomes medicine, not always easy, but always conscious. Jung often contrasted two figures to illustrate this difference. Nietzsche, whose penetrating perception stripped away illusions with ruthless clarity, but who became trapped in identification with that clarity until it consumed him. And Meister Eckhart, the mystic who could see into the depths of human and divine reality, yet offered his insights in a way that nourished rather than shattered. The difference was not in what they saw, but in how they held it. When you reach this understanding, the compulsion to fix others begins to fade. You no longer measure the worth of your gift by how much it changes the people around you. You understand that the self's role is not to force evolution, but to embody it so fully that others feel the invitation simply by being near you. And in that, a strange thing happens. The very isolation that once felt like exile begins to feel like sovereignty. You are no longer outside the circle because you've been cast out. You are standing at its edge because that is where you can see both the fire at its center and the stars beyond it. You belong to both. You serve both. And in serving both, you discover the gift was never meant to save you from loneliness. It was meant to teach you how to live fully in two worlds, the visible and the invisible, without losing yourself in either. It is here at this edge between worlds that something profound begins to settle in you. The restlessness that once drove you to search for someone, anyone who could match the depth of your vision. It quiets. Not because you've given up, but because you've stopped needing the external world to mirror you perfectly. You have become your own mirror. This is the beginning of true individuation, not the fantasy of becoming flawless, but the reality of becoming whole. You no longer fracture yourself to make others comfortable, nor do you force them to shatter their illusions for your comfort. Instead, you move with a steadiness born of knowing that the self is not threatened by what it sees and does not require the world to validate it. Jung understood that this was the only way forward for those with superior perception. Without integration, you risk either inflation, believing yourself above the rest, or dissolution, losing yourself entirely in the psychic currents you absorb. But with integration, you can stand as a bridge carrying awareness from the depths to the surface without spilling it in destructive waves. And yet the work does not end here. Integration is not a final resting place. It is a living relationship with your own depths. There will be times, moments of stress, grief, or sudden change, when the old overwhelm returns, when you find yourself flooded again with other people's emotions or buried under the weight of what you see. If you are conscious, you will recognize this not as failure but as a signal. It is time to return to solitude, to shadow work, to the practices that clarify what is yours and what is not. You will learn to treat these regressions as reminders of the delicate balance you keep. The gift does not demand perfection from you, only your willingness to keep refining your relationship to it. In this refinement, you will also begin to notice the role of the anima and animus. Those inner figures Jung described as the bridge to the unconscious, carrying qualities of the opposite gender within you. They appear in dreams and imagination, in projections onto others, often as guides or challengers. For someone with your perceptive depth, these figures are not abstract ideas. They are living presences in the psyche, shaping how you meet the unknown within yourself. If your anima or animus remains unconscious, they will distort your gift, turning it into seduction, manipulation, or idealization. You will see through others but become blind to your own fantasies about them. If integrated, they become allies, lending you balance between intuition and reason, receptivity and action. They help you not just perceive the hidden, but relate to it in a way that fosters growth rather than destruction. This is why dreams become so important on your path. For the highly perceptive individual, dreams are not random scraps of thought. They are the psyche's way of showing you what you have missed in waking life. They may reveal the parts of yourself you've been projecting onto others. They may warn you when your boundaries are dissolving. They may present you with symbols of your own power, not as grandiosity, but as a quiet truth to be carried with humility. If you pay attention, you'll see that the unconscious speaks in the same layered symbolic way that you perceive the world. The patterns you see outside yourself are echoed in the images you encounter within. And when those two realms begin to speak to each other, outer perception and inner vision, your gift stops being a constant source of strain. It becomes a dialogue. This is the turning point where your perception no longer feels like something you must defend or justify. You know what it is. You know how it works. You know when to trust it and when to let it pass without action. It is no longer the master of your life. It has become a skill, an organ of consciousness you can direct with intention. And now you can begin to use it in service without sacrifice. This does not mean martyrdom. Jung was clear: to serve from a place of depletion is to offer poison disguised as medicine. Your work, whether in formal roles or in the quiet weave of daily life, becomes most potent when you give from a place of inner abundance, when you are rooted enough in your own self that you can offer what you see without needing anything in return. This is where the legacy of your gift begins to take shape, often in ways you cannot measure. You may never know whose life shifted because you offered a word at the right time, or whose inner walls began to soften because you stood before them without judgment. The work you do may be invisible in the moment, but it threads itself into the collective psyche, becoming part of a larger transformation that extends beyond your lifetime. And perhaps that is the final release. The understanding that your gift is not for recognition, not for proving your worth, but for the quiet, steady evolution of consciousness itself. You are not here to force the future into being, but to prepare the ground so that when it arrives, it can take root. The danger of seeing what others don't is still real. There will always be those who turn away, who resist, who misinterpret your vision. But it no longer has the power to undo you, because now you know the danger was never in the gift itself, but in carrying it without the container of the self. And once that container is built, the gift can finally be what it was always meant to be: a medicine for both you and the world. There is a kind of calm that comes when you stop fighting the truth of what you are. You see now that the early years of your gift were spent in constant friction, trying to soften it so others wouldn't flinch, or sharpening it to cut through their denial. Either way, you were at war with it. And in being at war with it, you were at war with yourself. Jung knew this stage well. In his own confrontation with the unconscious, he nearly drowned in visions and perceptions that threatened to tear apart his sense of self. He was menaced by a psychosis, as he put it, until he realized that the only way through was to stop treating what he saw as an enemy to be subdued or an oracle to be obeyed. Instead, he began to relate to it, to approach it with curiosity, humility, and the patience of someone tending a long-growing tree. You are beginning to live in that same way. No longer dominated by the urgency to act on everything you perceive, you allow the images, impressions, and subtle cues to rise and fall like tides. You have learned that not all waters must be crossed the moment they appear. Some are meant to be watched, understood, and left to run their course. And because of this shift, your gift begins to take on a different texture. It is no longer just about detecting what is wrong, broken, or hidden. You begin to perceive beauty with the same acuity you once reserved for shadows. You notice the way someone's eyes soften when they feel truly heard. You feel the moment a room exhales because tension has quietly resolved. You sense the unspoken gratitude in someone who doesn't have the words to thank you. This is the other half of the vision, the part that can so easily be missed when you are locked in survival mode. Seeing the shadow is vital. It is the map of what must be integrated. But seeing the light in its fragile, flickering forms is what keeps the map from turning into a prison. Jung believed that this balance was essential. The self contains both the darkness of the unconscious and the radiance of emerging consciousness. To serve the evolution of the psyche is to hold both in view, neither denying the shadow nor worshiping the light. You become the still point where these opposites can meet without one devouring the other. From this place, your work in the world begins to change. You stop approaching people as puzzles to be solved or wounds to be diagnosed. Instead, you meet them as whole beings in process, each carrying their own relationship to shadow and light. Your gift becomes less about intrusion and more about invitation, an opening in the air around you that says, "If you wish, you may be more yourself here." This is the quiet power Jung admired in those who had completed enough of their individuation to stand without armor. They were not concerned with convincing or converting. They simply were, and in their being, they stirred something unspoken in others. You begin to understand that this is what it means to be a culture carrier, someone whose presence embodies a way of living that is not yet common, but is deeply needed. And though you may still walk through long stretches where no one mirrors you fully, the loneliness is not the same. It is not the loneliness of exile, but the solitude of one who knows their place is both within and beyond the crowd. You can sit in silence without shrinking. You can join in the collective without losing yourself. Your perception no longer isolates you by force. It sets you apart by choice. There will still be days when you feel the ache, when you wish just for an hour you could turn it off, when you long for the simplicity of not knowing what you know. These are the days you must remember that your gift is not about ease, it is about evolution. The consciousness you carry is part of a larger unfolding that moves slowly through human history, seeded in individuals long before it blooms in the collective. You are one of those seeds. Your task is not to rush the flowering, but to remain rooted and alive so that when the time comes, you are ready to open. And so you keep refining. You keep listening inward, not just outward. You keep tending the vessel of the self so it can hold whatever the next tide brings, whether that is another shadow rising from the depths or another glimpse of beauty breaking through the surface. Because now you know the danger of seeing what others don't is not in the seeing. It is in forgetting that the one who sees must also be the one who holds, contains, and integrates. Without that, the vision is too heavy. With it, the vision becomes light enough to carry for a lifetime. And perhaps someday others will meet you here, not because you have pulled them into your depth, but because they have found their own. There comes a moment when you realize you are no longer living on the defensive. Your perception, once a constant source of tension between you and the world, now moves through you like breath. It is not a sword you swing, nor a burden you drag, but a current that flows naturally, quietly shaping the way you inhabit your life. In the early years, every unspoken truth felt urgent, as if naming it was the only way to keep it from devouring the room. Now you see that the unconscious does not yield to force. It opens in its own time, and your role is not to pry it apart, but to be present enough that when it does open, there is someone who can witness it without fear. This shift changes everything about the way you engage. You no longer feel the need to warn everyone about what's coming, even when you can sense it long before they do. You can stand at the edge of a storm and trust that some must walk into it before they can understand. Not because you wish them harm, but because you know that certain truths cannot be handed over, they must be lived into. Jung wrote, "What is not brought to consciousness comes to us as fate." You understand now that fate in this sense is simply unconscious material seeking a way into awareness. Your presence in someone's life can soften that passage, but you cannot replace it. And so you choose when to speak and when to remain silent, not out of fear of rejection, but out of respect for the unfolding of another person's path. You learn to carry truths that are not yours to reveal without feeling the old pressure to unload them. The container you have built is strong enough to hold what once overwhelmed you. This is the stage where your vision becomes truly creative. Because it is no longer reactive, no longer just spotting what's broken, it begins to sense what could be built. You can feel not only the hidden fracture in someone's story, but also the unopened door in it. You can sense the possibility before it takes form, the new self trying to be born beneath the old patterns. When you see this, you can meet people in the place between who they have been and who they are becoming. You can speak to the part of them that already knows the truth, even if it has not yet found words. And because you are not trying to drag them forward, they can hear you without defense. This is perhaps the most powerful aspect of your gift when integrated. It becomes generative, not just diagnostic. It can inspire growth without imposing it. It can mirror what is beautiful and strong in someone with the same clarity it once brought to their shadow. You may begin to notice, too, that the world responds differently to you now. Where before you were met with suspicion or resistance, you may find that people seek you out. Not because they understand your gift in full, but because they sense the way you make them feel seen without being judged, known without being exposed. And yet you do not mistake this for universal acceptance. There will still be those who turn away still moments when your perception is unwelcome. But it no longer throws you off balance. You meet it with the same composure you bring to everything else, knowing that readiness is not something you can force. This is the point where the gift stops being about you entirely. It is no longer tied to your need for belonging, for recognition, or for being right. It simply exists as part of the way you serve, not in the sense of servitude, but in the sense of contribution. And in this contribution, you begin to glimpse the larger arc of your life. You see that your role is not to change the world all at once, but to embody a way of being that helps the collective inch forward. Your presence becomes a quiet counterweight to the inertia of unconsciousness. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of the conscious minority, those few who carry awareness into places where it has not yet taken root. You may never see the full harvest of what you plant, but you know now that the work is not in the outcome, but in the planting itself. In time, even the idea of danger begins to dissolve. The danger was real when your gift was unmoored, when it tore at your connections and flooded your identity. But now you hold it with such steadiness that it becomes less a risk than a responsibility, one you are willing to bear because it is simply part of who you are. And perhaps this is the quiet revelation you've been moving toward all along. Your perception is not a curse to be managed, nor a mission to be fulfilled. It is simply the way you are tuned, the instrument through which your life plays its music. And the more you live in harmony with it, the more that music becomes part of a larger song, one that has been playing long before you arrived and will continue long after you are gone. You have stopped trying to make others hear the whole symphony. You simply play your part, knowing that in time, the melody will find its way into the hearts that are ready. And so you arrive at a place you could not have imagined in those early years, when the weight of what you saw felt unbearable. The world has not changed its nature. People still hide behind their masks. The collective still resists its own shadow. Truth still moves through most lives like a ghost they'd rather not meet. But you have changed your relationship to it all. There is a spaciousness inside you now, a quiet that does not come from blindness but from having made peace with sight. You no longer chase after every fragment of hidden meaning, nor shrink from the moments when something unspeakable flickers across a face. You can allow what you see to pass through you without clinging to it, without fearing it will shatter you. In Jung's terms, this is the transcendent function in motion, the place where opposites meet without annihilating each other. You can hold your gift and your humanity together, your vision and your limits, the vastness of what you perceive, and the humility of knowing it is only one part of the whole. And in that holding there is a kind of grace. You no longer need to prove to yourself or to anyone that what you see is real. The reality of it lives in you, steady and unquestioned, like the rhythm of your own heartbeat. When someone invites you to share it, you do. When they don't, you keep it within, not as a secret burden, but as a private knowing. You've learned that there is no virtue in exhausting yourself to prove the value of your gift. The culture may not yet be ready for the level of consciousness you carry, but readiness is not your task. Your task is to keep the flame alive, so that when the darkness in someone's life becomes too heavy, they have somewhere to turn, where light still burns without judgment. This is why Jung called those who integrated their superior perception pioneers of consciousness. Not because they conquered new territory in the way explorers plant flags, but because they inhabited a kind of inner land before the rest of the world had words for it. You are part of that lineage now, the quiet builders of bridges between the known and the unknown. And perhaps you have noticed the gift has changed you as much as you have changed it. In learning to see clearly without being consumed, you have also learned to live more fully, to notice not only the shadows but the small, stubborn lights in people's lives, to stand in the midst of contradiction and feel no need to resolve it instantly, to let the complexity of life be exactly what it is without rushing to tame it. You understand now why Jung warned that most people who see everything never learn to use what they see wisely. The danger was never in the perception itself, but in the unintegrated relationship to it, the tendency to become inflated or to collapse into isolation or to dissolve entirely into the psychic field of others. You have walked near each of these edges and learned to step back before falling. And with that comes a deep humility. You know you will walk those edges again. The path of integration is not linear, and the tides of the unconscious never stop moving, but you also know that you have the tools, the solitude, the shadow work, the inner dialogue to return to center when you drift. You trust yourself now in a way you could not before. It may be that no one will ever fully understand the scope of what you carry, but you have stopped measuring the worth of your life by how many can walk with you to its deepest places. The few who can will find you, and for the rest your presence will still leave an imprint even if they cannot name it. So you live quietly, shaping the world in ways that cannot be counted. A conversation here, a listening silence there, a subtle shift in the atmosphere of a room. The work is not glamorous, but it is real, it is human, and it is enough. And maybe as you move through the years you will notice something you once thought impossible. The gift you once feared might destroy you has become so much a part of you that you no longer think of it as a gift at all. It is simply how you see, how you listen, how you live. You were never meant to blind yourself to fit the collective's comfort. You were meant to learn how to see without breaking under the weight of vision. You were meant to become what Jung believed such individuals could be. Not martyrs to truth, not exiles from humanity, but carriers of a deeper way of being. And so you keep walking, not apart from the world, but alongside it, aware of its shadows, attuned to its hidden light, and anchored in a self that can hold both without fear. The danger of seeing everything has not disappeared, but it has been transformed into something far rarer. The wisdom to know that you were never too much for this world. You were simply born to help it see. You don't notice the exact moment it begins. There's no thunderclap, no sign in the sky, only a quiet, persistent fracture somewhere deep inside. At first, you tell yourself it's nothing, just another passing mood, the kind you've carried before. But this time it lingers. It pulls at the threads of your carefully woven self, loosening the stitches one by one, until the life you've built no longer feels like it belongs to you. The friends, the goals, the dreams, they're all still there. Yet something in their shape has shifted. It's not that they've changed. It's that you have, in a way you can't explain, even to yourself. You feel a strange weight, not heavy like despair, but dense, like something ancient pressing from within, and no matter how you try to shake it, it stays. You might call it restlessness. You might call it depression. You might call it nothing at all. But beneath the names, it's the same thing, the beginning of an awakening that refuses to announce itself politely. You were taught to think awakening is bliss, the soft golden light spilling over mountaintops. But in truth, it begins more like an earthquake. It unearths something so raw, so untamed, that the personality you've been polishing for years begins to splinter. And here's the first truth you will meet: awakening does not arrive to comfort you. It arrives to dismantle you. You feel it most in the silences, the ones that used to be harmless. Now, they roar. They press you into corners you never stood in before. They ask questions without words. They point to the masks you've worn so long they've fused to your skin, and they demand, "Is this really you?" At first, you want to answer yes, because admitting otherwise means stepping into a wilderness you can't map. And yet, deep down, you already know the truth. The yes would be a lie. The moment you admit this to yourself, even in the smallest whisper, the old scaffolding begins to crumble. Your gods, your idols, your cherished beliefs, none of them shatter all at once. But their colors fade. They no longer hold the same authority. You thought the collapse would be fast, like a building brought down in a single blast. Instead, it's slow, relentless, an unmaking that works in shadows. And the deeper truth is, this is not a mistake. It is the nature of real awakening to peel away every layer that is not truly yours. Jung said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain," and you feel now how literal that is. It is not the pain of being wounded from the outside. It is the ache of seeing clearly for the first time. The world, as you knew it, begins to dissolve not physically, but existentially. The old meanings no longer hold. The labels that once kept you steady now feel like cages. You realize the life you've been living was, in many ways, a necessary dream, a safe enclosure that allowed you to survive until now. And yet, something in you is no longer willing to sleep. Something ancient, buried deep in the folds of your being, has risen, and it will not let you close your eyes again. This is the moment most turn back. They numb themselves with routine, run toward comfort, rebuild the dream, not because they are weak, but because the wilderness is terrifying. Out there, the mind loses its compass. Out there, every familiar landmark disappears, and you must rely on a sense of direction you haven't yet learned to trust. Out there, you meet your shadow. At first, you think the shadow is an enemy. It is made of everything you worked so hard to hide, the rage you swallowed, the fear you masked with competence, the need you buried under independence. It comes to you now not in gentle whispers but in triggers, in jealousies, in the sharp sting of shame. It shows itself in every reflex you wish you didn't have, every sabotage you can't explain. You try to push it away, but the harder you resist, the more it lingers. Jung knew this dance well. He called the shadow not a curse, but a part of you waiting to be reclaimed. To awaken fully, you must stop running from it. You must invite it in not because it is pleasant, but because it is yours. This is the most dangerous threshold, the one most people never cross. Because the shadow doesn't knock politely. It barges in, carrying the scent of every wound you've denied, every betrayal of yourself you've excused. It demands that you feel what you spent a lifetime avoiding. And it doesn't just show up in the mind, it arrives in the body, in the tightening of the chest, the knot in the gut, the restlessness in the bones. You begin to see how much of your life was built not on truth, but on survival. You learned early that the world rewards the persona, the curated self, the one who knows how to smile when dying inside, how to work twice as hard for half as much love, how to trade authenticity for acceptance. And now, that persona is cracking. The light seeps through the fissures, but so does everything you tried to forget. This is not the part of awakening that gets celebrated. This is exile from the familiar, from the roles you played, from the version of yourself that fits so neatly into other people's expectations. And exile is lonely. You will feel as if no one understands you anymore, not even yourself. You will grieve, not only for what you've lost, but for the illusion you can never return to. And yet, in that grief, something begins to breathe. The shadow becomes less of a monster and more of a messenger. You start to notice that behind the anger is a longing for freedom. Behind the fear is a hunger for life. Behind the shame is the tender, unhealed self who has been waiting for you to turn toward them instead of away. And here, in this confrontation, you realize something extraordinary. The parts of you you feared most are the very parts that can make you whole. This is why the descent is sacred. Not because it feels good, but because it strips away every false layer until only what is real remains. The persona will fight to the last breath. It will tell you that this path is madness, that you're losing yourself. And in a way, you are. But you are losing only the self you never truly were, the one built for approval, for safety, for survival in a world that punishes the raw truth of a human soul. The shadow asks only for your presence, not your judgment, not your control, just your willingness to stay. And as you stay, something remarkable happens. The pain, while still sharp, begins to carry a strange kind of beauty. The silence that once roared now holds space for you. The chaos that once overwhelmed now feels like the breaking of chains. You begin to sense that this unmaking is not the end, it is the beginning of becoming. And here, even in the trembling, even in the not knowing, you take your first step into the wilderness without turning back, because somewhere inside, you already understand what you are losing is not life, but the lie that kept you from living. You walk further into the uncharted terrain, and the silence follows you like a shadow that has finally decided to speak. It doesn't speak in words, but in sensations, in the pull behind your ribs when you hesitate, in the heat rising to your face when old wounds are touched, in the tightening of your jaw when truth is too close for comfort. This is the language of the unconscious, and though you've ignored it for years, now it floods your senses. You find yourself in a dialogue with something older than your mind, something that does not care about your plans or your image. It only cares about what is real. At first, you want to tame it, to control it. You want to turn this awakening into a project, a checklist, something you can complete and move past. But this is not that kind of journey. Here, control is the very thing you must surrender. The more you try to manage it, the more it slips through your grasp, revealing just how fragile your sense of mastery always was. You realize now that the self you defended so fiercely was mostly scaffolding beautiful, necessary at one point, but never the essence. And then it happens, the first cracks in the old story split wide enough for light to enter. It's not the warm glow you imagined, but a piercing beam that reveals everything: your habits, your compromises, your hidden bargains with life. It shines on the moments you betrayed yourself to keep the peace, the times you stayed silent to be loved, the countless ways you traded your truth for belonging. It hurts to see, but the hurt is different this time. It's not the pain of oppression, it's the ache of finally facing what's been there all along. Your dreams shift too. The images that come at night are no longer random, they are alive with symbols. You see figures you don't recognize but somehow know. You walk through landscapes that seem foreign yet familiar. Jung would tell you these are not meaningless, they are messages from the unconscious, the same force that is reshaping you now. These dreams are mirrors, showing you the parts of yourself too elusive for waking thought. You begin to listen to them, not as puzzles to be solved, but as companions on the path. It's here that you encounter the deeper architecture of the psyche, the persona, the shadow, the self. You start to see how the persona, the mask you wear in the world, is not inherently false, but incomplete. It helped you navigate life, but it cannot contain the fullness of who you are. The shadow, once feared, now appears as the missing half, the keeper of the instincts, emotions, and truths you exiled to stay acceptable. And the self, the deep center you've barely touched, beckons to you, not with promises of perfection, but with the possibility of wholeness. But wholeness is not the same as comfort. In fact, the closer you get, the more it dismantles, because to move toward it, you must dissolve the false borders within you, the walls that separate your love from your anger, your courage from your fear, your light from your dark. And you see now that those walls were never keeping the world out. They were keeping you in. In the quiet hours, you feel the grief of everything you're releasing. You realize that many of your closest connections were built on the very patterns you are now breaking. Some relationships fade, not through malice, but because your frequency no longer matches. There are nights when the loneliness feels unbearable, when you wonder if you've made a mistake. You long for the days when the old illusions still worked, when you could sink into their familiar embrace. But when you try to go back, the door has vanished, the dream has dissolved. So you stay here, in this liminal space, the cocoon where nothing is certain, where the old identity has died and the new one has yet to take shape. You want to rush it, to tear open the walls and emerge already formed. But if you do, you will find your wings unfinished. The cocoon is not a prison, it's the womb of your becoming. And in this womb, the soul works in silence, rearranging everything. It tests you. It sends you the same triggers, the same patterns, to see if you will react as you once did. At first, you do. You fall into the old grooves, the reflexive defenses. But slowly, something shifts. You begin to pause where you once rushed. You begin to notice the charge in your body, the story forming in your mind, and you hold it instead of unleashing it. This is not suppression, it's presence. It's the art of staying with yourself in the very places you used to abandon yourself. And here is the paradox. The more you embrace the parts you thought were unlovable, the less power they have to run your life. The shadow is no longer an intruder, it's a guest who has been welcomed home. It doesn't mean the pain vanishes, but the fear of it does. You understand now that the pain is not here to destroy you, it is here to cleanse you of everything that is not true. You start to see the world differently, not as a battlefield to win, not as a stage to impress, but as a mirror. Every person you meet reflects something in you, sometimes beauty, sometimes wound, sometimes a part you've barely begun to know. You notice how easily the mind wants to project, to place blame, to see the shadow out there instead of in here. But each time you turn the mirror inward, you reclaim a piece of yourself. This is individuation, not the fantasy of becoming flawless, but the reality of becoming whole. It is not the removal of contradiction, but the integration of it. You are no longer either light or dark, you are both. And you see how life flows in the tension between them. You are no longer only the roles you play, you are the actor, the stage, the script, and the silence between the lines. And in this recognition, something subtle but profound takes root. You begin to trust the process, even when it dismantles you. You begin to sense that there is an intelligence in the unraveling, one far greater than your ego could design. You don't need to see the whole path anymore, you only need to take the next honest step. You are not out of the wilderness yet, but for the first time, you realize you don't need to be. The wilderness is not a place you escape. It's where you meet yourself, fully, without disguise. And that is worth every step you've taken. You notice how your gaze changes. Where you once scanned for approval, you now search for truth, even when it's inconvenient, even when it cost you the belonging you once thought you couldn't live without. You don't wake up deciding to be brave. You simply can't pretend anymore. The scaffolding that kept you upright in the old world has fallen away, and you are learning to walk without it, shaky and real. There are days the air itself feels thinner, as if you've climbed too high too fast. Your mind keeps asking for guarantees. What will you become? Who will stay? How will this end? And you keep meeting the same answer. The only honest one you don't know. But you do know what is false. You know it in your bones. You know it when your mouth tries to speak a sentence that doesn't fit your soul and your body refuses to cooperate. That refusal is your first act of freedom. In the night, your dreams grow strange and saturated, thrumming with images that make your morning chest feel heavy with meaning. A river appears again and again, a child playing with matches, a doorway with no knob. You try to decode them like riddles, then something softer arises, the sense that they aren't puzzles to solve, but presences to meet. They are your unconscious, not an enemy, but a depth. The symbols are your mother tongue beneath the one you learned in school, each one carrying not answers, but invitations. Jung called dreams the royal road to the unconscious, and you can feel why. They speak in the geometry of your soul, rearranging you from the inside with a grammar too honest for daylight. You stop demanding clarity and start practicing reverence. The river does not have to explain itself to be real. You start to recognize the subtle choreography of projection, how quickly the mind throws what it can't hold on to someone else. A friend's casual comment stings more than it should, and before your old impulse to blame becomes a wildfire, you pause and ask, what exactly did I feel? A flare of envy, a pang of not enoughness. The shadow's voice, disguised as certainty about someone else's motives, turns out to be a letter addressed to you. You read it this time. Most people don't survive awakening because the letters arrive every day, and some are written in grief. They tell you where you left yourself. They ask for your signature, for your willingness to claim what you once disowned. Signing is a small death. It is also the beginning of your life. You sense movements inside you that don't fit into the neat binaries of your persona, the part that plans and the part that longs, the rational and the mysterious, the protector and the poet. They each ask for a seat at the table. This is not anarchy, it is the self assembling a parliament. The anima, your inner feminine, begins to rise if you have drowned her in productivity. She returns you to the body, to intuition, to the slow pulse of meaning underneath achievement. The animus, your inner masculine, steadies you if you have lost yourself in feeling. He brings structure that does not suffocate, boundaries that do not banish love. These are not stereotypes. They are inner dynamics, a harmonizing of energies long split by your survival strategies. You notice conversations between them in small, ordinary moments, the anima asking for rest when you would have pushed, the animus drawing a line when you would have bled out of habit. Together, they begin to court a different rhythm, the rhythm of a life built from the inside. This rhythm disrupts the old economy of your worth. Praise loses some of its sugar. Criticism loses some of its poison. You learn that your nervous system held centuries of rehearsed responses, the body bracing for punishments that never arrive or reliving ones that did. Patterns surface like ghosts, not to haunt but to be released. The trigger that once detonated a week of self-hate now becomes a bell. You hear it and breathe into the place that aches. You notice the story starting, I am too much. I am not enough. I will be abandoned, and you escort it to a quiet room inside you where the child who first believed it is still waiting. You don't lecture them. You sit. You let their tears wash the sediment of years. Presence does what advice never could. Some mornings you wake to the ash and wonder where your life went. You used to know how to move through the world, perform, achieve, impress. Now your movements are slower, more deliberate. Like someone relearning how to use their limbs after a long sleep. You grieve the efficiency of the old life, even as you can't return. You used to speed up when fear whispered. Now you slow down. The persona whispers too, promising safety if you put the mask back on. But safety purchased with self-abandonment is a loan that charges your soul compound interest. You decline. In this thinning space, truth becomes tactile. You feel it in your body like a tuning fork struck against the bone. A conversation leaves you clear or coated in static. A job that once glittered now tastes like dust. A relationship that never asked for your depth now can't survive the weight of your honesty. You don't blame anyone. You simply stop making what is dead pretend to be alive. The wilderness doesn't get more predictable, but you get more trusting. You sense a deeper intelligence arranging meetings you could never schedule and endings you would never choose. It isn't cruelty. It's calibration. There are days you mistake this recalibration for failure. You think you're regressing when old wounds resurface. But they aren't here to drag you backward. They're here because you are finally strong enough to hold them without collapsing. You used to run at the first tremor. Now you stay, and the tremor becomes a bridge. The psyche does not want to punish you. It wants to include you, every part. One does not become enlightened. Jung wrote, by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. You feel the truth of this not as philosophy, but as a physical event, a tender heat at the center of the pain as you bring it close enough to be known. The darkness, touched by awareness, softens into night, and the night is not an enemy of dawn. You notice how the ego tries to re-enlist you with old wages control, image, certainty. The currency no longer holds its value. Control becomes a cage you can feel with your fingertips. Image becomes a costume that fits no living body. Certainty becomes a closed window in a house that needs air. When you open the window, wind rushes through. It rattles the frames, knocks over your favorite vase, blows your papers to the floor. The mess looks like chaos, but chaos is the raw clay of creation. You kneel and gather the pages, letting the wind decide which ones were never meant to be written. People notice you changing. Some step closer, drawn not to your words but to the way your presence makes the room breathe. Others step back, alarmed by the mirror you have become. Your job is not to dim yourself so no one is startled. Your job is to remain transparent enough for truth to pass through you without distortion. Embodiment is quiet like that. When you are no longer performing, your being does the speaking. You say no without needing to justify it. You say yes without promising the sun. You stop apologizing for what your soul cannot do. It isn't glamorous. Sometimes it means crying in your car because your body is rewriting history. And there is no shortcut, only breath. Only the strange grace of surviving the feeling you thought would end you. Sometimes it means losing a future you spent a decade building because it was built from an abandoned self. Sometimes it means waking in the night with your heart racing and realizing you are not dying, you are being born. And birth is work. You keep thinking there should be a clean line between the old life and the new. There isn't. There is a threshold you cross not once, but many times, each crossing marked by a smaller death, each death making space for a more spacious life. The self, that quiet center you have started to sense, does not shout instructions. It keeps returning you to what is real. You feel it when your hand pauses above the send button and you choose honesty over manipulation. You feel it when you notice the urge to be impressive and let it drift by like a cloud. You feel it when you stop waking to a chorus of should and instead rise to the drumbeat of what is true for you today. The self is not a throne you climb, but an axis you align with, a verticality that makes the horizontal bustle look like smoke. When you stand there even for a minute, the world organizes differently. You don't need everything to work to be okay. You need to be here. The descent still carries bite, but every descent now hides a small staircase upward, carved from the very stone that once felt like a wall. You begin to trust that architecture down into sensation, up into spaciousness, down into grief, up into tenderness, down into rage, up into boundary. You don't force the ascent. You discover it embedded in the fall. The wilderness teaches you that truth breaks you only where you were false, and that every break can be mended with gold. You are not collecting achievements anymore. You are collecting pieces of yourself that never should have been given away. And when the next letter from your shadow arrives, handwritten, unguarded, addressed to the you who will finally open it, you do not panic. You make tea. You sit by a window that remembers your childhood sky. You read slowly. You feel the ache, the tremor, the old urge to strategize. And then you breathe. The letter is not a threat. It is an invitation to return one more fragment to the whole, to let the part you once exiled find its place in your house. You do not lecture the part. You listen until the words finish and the silence begins. And in that silence, you recognize yourself. The silence that follows is not empty. It hums. It feels like standing at the edge of a vast ocean in the dark. You can't see the waves, but you can hear their rhythm, feel their pull in your bones. This silence is alive, and you realize it's been speaking to you all along. Only now you are still enough to listen. You begin to understand that awakening was never about adding more to your life, but about removing everything that muffled this hum. The voices of fear, ambition, and constant comparison were loud enough to drown it out for years. Now, with the noise reduced, you can hear the truth as it always was: quiet, steady, and strangely patient. You start to notice that the more you listen, the less you need to explain yourself. Words feel too small to contain what's happening anyway. The mind wants to narrate, to catalog each insight, but the self has no interest in commentary. It wants embodiment. It wants you to live the truth without rehearsing it in your head first. This is the difference between performing awakening and becoming it. You can talk about your shadow for years and never meet it. You can write eloquently about surrender while still clinging to every illusion. But here, in this silence, you are asked to enact what you've learned, to risk being changed by it in the smallest, most ordinary moments. And it is ordinary moments that test you. The conversation where you feel the old urge to placate. The decision where safety whispers in one ear and truth in the other. The day your body is weary and the old persona demands you push through. You find yourself choosing differently, not because you've decided to be virtuous, but because you can't betray yourself the same way anymore. There's a new kind of pain in betraying your own soul after you've heard its voice clearly. It's sharper, cleaner, intolerable in a way that makes you stop mid-step. Your relationships shift again, subtly but decisively. Those who see you as you are without needing you to be who you were become rare, luminous presences. With them, silence feels safe. You don't have to narrate your transformation or defend it. You can just sit, breathe, and let the invisible work continue. Others fall away without ceremony. Sometimes they retreat because your changes unsettle them. Sometimes you step back because you can feel yourself shrinking in their company. You learn not to force closeness where there is no resonance. This is not rejection, it is alignment. Grief still moves through you. but it changes shape. It becomes less about the specific losses and more about the tenderness of letting go itself. You see that everything you've released, identities, beliefs, relationships, were chapters, and their endings were not punishments but completions. The ache is real, but beneath it is a gratitude you can't quite articulate. You begin to realize that to live without constant self-abandonment is to accept that endings are not evidence of failure. They are evidence of movement. Your dreams deepen. Some nights they feel like initiations, each one pulling you through landscapes that challenge your courage. You walk through houses with endless rooms, each containing a memory you'd forgotten. You meet figures who seem to know you better than you know yourself. Sometimes they offer guidance. Sometimes they just look at you, and the look alone rearranges something inside. You wake with a sense that you've been somewhere real, not metaphorical, a place beyond time where the unconscious does its work directly. These experiences don't need translation. They alter you in ways the mind can't record. In waking life, you become more fluent in the symbolic. A crow landing in your path, the sudden scent of rain before it falls, a stranger's phrase echoing something you dreamed the night before. These are no longer dismissed as coincidence. They feel like threads in a tapestry that has always been weaving you into itself. Jung called this synchronicity the meeting of inner and outer events in a way that reveals meaning without causation. You feel it not as a theory, but as a lived reality. The world begins to feel less like an obstacle course and more like a living mirror. The mirror doesn't flatter, though it reflects the beauty you've reclaimed, yes, but also the distortions you still carry. And here you meet another truth of awakening. It's not a one-time event, but a rhythm. The shadow doesn't leave you after one encounter. The persona doesn't dissolve after one revelation. The unconscious doesn't reveal itself all at once. It reveals what you are ready to integrate. This is why patience becomes less of a virtue and more of a necessity. You see the danger of forcing yourself to evolve faster than your soul's pace. Transformation is not a sprint. It is a deepening spiral. Every descent brings you closer to the center, and every return to the surface brings a fuller expression of that center. You also start to sense that the self, this vast center, doesn't just belong to you. It is you, and it is more than you. It connects you to something beyond the personal and underlying pattern that moves through all life. When you rest in it, you feel less like a separate entity and more like a wave in a larger ocean. This doesn't erase your individuality, it roots it in something unshakable. You are not here to escape your humanity, but to inhabit it fully, aware of the divine pulse that beats through it. From this place, suffering changes its texture. You stop asking why it exists and start noticing what it opens. Pain becomes less of an intrusion and more of a portal. You see how each wound you've tended has widened your capacity for compassion, not the pity that looks down, but the kind of seeing that meets another's eyes and says, without words, I know. And because you know, you can hold space without needing to fix. You realize now that much of the world's frantic fixing is just a way to avoid feeling. As your tolerance for feeling grows, so does your capacity for joy, but not the fleeting rush that depends on conditions. This joy is quieter, rooted in being. It doesn't vanish when circumstances shift because it isn't built on them. It arises when you're washing dishes, watching a shadow move across a wall, hearing a laugh from another room. It's the joy of existing without constantly demanding that existence perform for you. This is the ground awakening was leading you toward all along, not ecstasy, not constant bliss, but a steady aliveness that can hold both sorrow and wonder without splitting in two. And so you keep walking, not toward an end, but deeper into a way of being that feels less like striving and more like remembering. You're not trying to get somewhere anymore. You are here. And here is alive with the hum you first heard when everything began to fall apart. The difference now is that you no longer fear its call. You walk to its rhythm. You let it shape your steps. The hum becomes your compass. It doesn't shout directions or hand you maps, it simply deepens when you're aligned and fades when you stray. You learn to feel for it in conversations, in choices, in the quiet between breaths. Sometimes it asks you to stay still when every part of your mind is screaming to move. Other times it urges you forward into uncertainty, when the safer option is to remain where you are. This is not logic as you've known it. It's the intelligence of the self, the kind that doesn't answer to fear or convenience. Following it is an act of faith, not in an outcome, but in your own capacity to walk in the dark without abandoning yourself. There is a strange thing that happens when you begin to live like this. Your life gets simpler, but not easier. The simplicity comes from the shedding. You no longer spend hours rehearsing what version of yourself to present. You no longer bend every decision through the filter of how it will be received. You stop negotiating with your own knowing in exchange for comfort. But the ease, the frictionless, problem-free existence your old self hoped awakening would bring never arrives. What comes instead is a willingness to meet the frictions without letting them define you. You realize that ease is not the absence of challenge, but the absence of constant self-betrayal. This is where the final illusions start to crumble. You see how much of your striving was built on borrowed dreams, ambitions handed down by family, culture, and the collective fear of being nobody. You see how much of your suffering came not from reality itself, but from trying to force it to match a picture it never agreed to. The persona was a master at chasing those pictures. The self has no interest in them. It's not here to make your life look perfect. It's here to make it real. And real often means unpredictable, raw, and unscripted. In this rawness, you notice something you missed before the world is full of mirrors disguised as strangers. A conversation with a cashier can crack something open in you. A passing glance from a child can remind you of the innocence you've been protecting without knowing it. The line between inner work and outer life dissolves. The same symbols that visit you in dreams start appearing in daylight. You stop separating the sacred from the mundane because you can feel the thread of meaning running through both. Washing your hands becomes an act of presence. Paying a bill becomes a small ceremony of reciprocity. The sacred doesn't need an altar, it needs your attention. But attention also makes you see what you once turned away from the collective shadow. You start to notice how much of the world's behavior mirrors the very patterns you've been dismantling inside yourself. The hunger for control, the fear of difference, the compulsive need to distract from pain, it's all there, scaled up to the size of nations. And here you face another choice. You can turn away, cloaking your awakening in personal comfort, or you can let your inner work inform how you meet the world. Not as a crusader armed with slogans, but as a presence that refuses to feed what is false. This is a quieter kind of activism, withdrawing your energy from the systems that thrive on unconsciousness, living in a way that embodies what you wish existed more widely. And there is a cost. Some will call you naive for refusing to play by the old rules. Others will call you arrogant for not participating in the rituals of false belonging. You will feel misunderstood, and you will want to explain yourself. But explanation is a language for convincing, and you are no longer here to convince. You are here to align. That alignment is not about being right, it's about being whole. The wholeness doesn't look like you imagined. It's not a state of constant harmony. It's a capacity to include. You can hold your rage without mistaking it for your identity. You can hold your grief without letting it define the horizon. You can even hold your joy without trying to clutch it into permanence. You begin to see that the point was never to banish the shadow, but to give it a place in the architecture of your being. The light and the dark are not enemies. They are the tension that creates your depth. Without both, you would be flat, easily bent by the winds of other people's expectations. This is individuation in its lived form. It's not about transcending your humanity but reclaiming it from the cages of conditioning. It's about becoming a self who can walk into the chaos of the world without losing the axis inside. That axis isn't an idea. It's the felt sense of standing in your own center while life moves through you. You don't cling to it, it clings to you, because it is you. And so your days are different now, not because they are grand or extraordinary, but because they are yours. You no longer measure them by how much you accomplished or how much you impressed. You measure them by how present you were with yourself, by whether you spoke from truth or from fear, by whether you met your own gaze without flinching. You find yourself in moments of unplanned stillness, a hand on your chest, feeling the rise and fall of your breath, realizing that this alone is enough to prove you are here. Sometimes the old ache returns, whispering that you've lost too much, that you've walked too far from the familiar to ever go back. And it's true, you can't go back, but you can go deeper. You can let that ache remind you of the life you refused to keep living, the one built on survival instead of authenticity. That ache is not the enemy. It is the scar tissue of your rebirth. Touch it, and you'll feel both the wound and the healing it holds. The hum is still there, stronger now. It has led you through exile, shadow, and the dismantling of every mask you thought you needed. It has asked you to surrender control, to sit in the dark, to hold conversations with the parts of yourself you once ran from. And you stayed. That staying has changed you in ways no one else will ever fully see. But you see it, you feel it. You are not the same person who began this journey, not because you became someone better, but because you became someone true. You no longer wait for a grand arrival, for that cinematic moment when the sky splits open and the meaning of your life is handed to you. You've seen enough of the inner terrain to know that awakening doesn't deliver a destination, it keeps revealing new rooms in a house you thought you'd already explored. Some rooms are bright, filled with laughter you didn't know you'd lost. Others are dim, echoing with the voices of the parts of you you've yet to embrace. You walk into each with the same quiet resolve not to conquer, but to witness. The witnessing itself changes things. Shadows soften under a steady gaze. Grief loosens its grip when it is no longer exiled to the cellar. There is a deep relief in realizing you are not here to finish yourself, as if you were some broken project. You are here to meet yourself again and again, in every phase, in every mood, in every contradiction. You begin to see how much energy you once spent trying to be consistent, to always present the same polished self to the world. Now you let yourself be seasonal. Some days your branches bloom, other days they are bare. Neither is more you than the other. Wholeness is not a fixed state, it's the capacity to hold your changing weather without disowning any of it. And this makes you gentler with others. You notice the masks they wear, the small lies they tell themselves to get through the day. You see the ways they try to hold themselves together, just as you did. You no longer feel the need to rip their illusions away, because you remember how fiercely you clung to yours until they could no longer serve you. Instead, you offer space for their truth to emerge on its own terms. Your presence becomes a mirror, not the kind that distorts to flatter, but the kind that reflects what is, without judgment. Some will look and see beauty they'd forgotten. Others will turn away, not ready to meet their own eyes. You don't chase them. You hold your own gaze. Life keeps testing you, not to punish, but to deepen your trust in what you've found. The same situations that once pulled you into old patterns return like weather systems you've seen before. An invitation to overextend yourself. A chance to buy belonging with self-abandonment. A moment when silence would keep you safe, but speech would keep you whole. And you choose differently now, not perfectly, but consciously. Each choice becomes a small act of alignment, a brick in the foundation of the life you're quietly building. That life doesn't announce itself. It grows in the soil of your daily choices, in the way you listen to your body before saying yes, in the way you let a moment breathe before reacting, in the way you honor your own truth without needing it to be universal. The world may not applaud these acts. There are no headlines for the person who refuses to betray themselves. But the applause you used to crave has been replaced by something steadier, self-trust. You can feel it in the quiet after a hard choice, in the calm that comes from knowing you didn't leave yourself behind. You've learned that the soul has its own timing, and it doesn't care about your impatience. The transformation you hope to rush unfolds in layers, and each layer requires its own death and birth. There are days you feel like you've regressed, like the work has been undone, but now you know better. You've seen the spiral, the way each cycle takes you deeper, even when it looks like you're circling the same ground. The terrain is familiar, but you are not the same traveler. Where you once walked with fear gripping your hand, you now walk with awareness at your side. Awareness is not always comfortable. It sharpens your perception. You feel the tension in a room before anyone speaks. You notice the dissonance between someone's words and the energy underneath. You sense the collective anxiety humming through the air. At times, it's overwhelming. You wonder if ignorance was easier, but easier is not what you came here for. You came for truth, and truth is a demanding companion. It doesn't allow you to look away, not from the suffering in the world, not from the shadows still moving inside you. Yet it also reveals beauty with equal intensity. A single moment of genuine connection. The way sunlight spills across a wall. The sound of your own breath when you remember to be here. It's in these moments that you understand the real gift of awakening the capacity to hold it all, not to escape pain in search of joy, but to stand in the middle of the full spectrum, letting each shade deepen the others. You stop waiting for life to arrange itself into a form that's safe to love. You love it as it is, not because it is perfect, but because it is alive. And that aliveness is the same pulse you feel in yourself, the same hum that guided you through every collapse and rebirth. You begin to see your story differently. The parts you once wished you could erase, your mistakes, your losses, your betrayals, become essential chapters. Without them, you would not have learned to stay in the fire, to meet yourself in the ashes. Without them, you would not have discovered that your worth was never something to earn, only something to remember. You see now that every fracture was a doorway, every ending a threshold. What looked like ruin was often the clearing that allowed the next truth to take root. And so you stop resisting the cycles. You stop demanding that life be linear. You start trusting the seasons within you, knowing that each has its purpose. You can rest in winter without fearing it will last forever. You can welcome the blossoms of spring without trying to hold them past their time. You can stand in the heat of summer's growth without exhausting yourself to make it endless. You can let the autumn leaves fall without mourning them as loss. You see now that this is how the self moves cyclically, rhythmically, always returning, never repeating exactly. The world outside still spins in its old patterns, and sometimes you feel the pull to rejoin its pace, to once again measure yourself by its metrics. But the pull doesn't land the way it used to. You've seen too much of yourself to go back to living half alive. And so you keep walking your quieter, truer path, not because it's easier, not because it guarantees anything, but because it's yours. And that is enough.